Welcome. I'm really pleased to welcome you to this inaugural COS Forum, Building the Future of Ophthalmology. For those who don't know me, I'm Colin Mann, immediate past president of COS. Tonight, we focus on the future direction of the COS and ophthalmology in Canada, and hear from speakers on advocacy, competence by design, drug shortages, and the COS annual meeting and exhibition. I have no financial disclosures. This webinar is accredited as a group learning activity under Section 1 as defined by the Maintenance of Certification Program of the Royal College and approved by the Canadian Ophthalmological Society. So what that means is you can get credit for the hour you spend with us in your Maintenance of Certification Program. The COS will be sending out an email shortly after the presentation with an evaluation link. Once you've completed the evaluation, you'll be able to download your certificate of attendance and can log into the activity in Mainport. The learning objectives for tonight's program: to understand the COS educational opportunities, offerings, professional development, and resources that are readily available to members, to integrate learnings about drug shortages, national vision care, scope expansion, access to eye care into clinical practice, and affect change through leadership opportunities on the board of directors or one of the COS councils and committees. Before we begin and get on to the meat of tonight's forum, a couple of housekeeping items. During tonight's program, you'll hear from 4 different speakers. After each presentation, there'll be a question and answer session. While you're listening to each presentation, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section. You'll find that tab at the bottom menu of your Zoom screen. I'll be doing my best to bring as many questions as I can within our allotted time to our presenters after each presentation. And then in addition, at the end of the evening, we hope to have a few minutes to return to our panel with any remaining or subsequent questions. So feel free to post those as you go along, as you're listening, and in the Q&A section, you'll find that tab at the bottom. Tonight, we're going to be looking for your engagement and input through the use of polls, which will be popping up through the presentations. In case you haven't been used to this feature in Zoom, we've got a fun test poll for you to practice with. And so we're going to move to that now. You'll see it pop up on your screen. There it is. We'll give you about 30 seconds to answer each poll, and you can choose. So in this case, what type of Zoomer are you after the last few years of getting used to Zoom? The one who turns their video off so they can eat supper? The one who just rushed home from work? The one who always talks while muted? Or the one whose kids make funny faces in the background? We'll give you just another couple of seconds to make your choice. And then perhaps we can close that off and pop up the results. So we all rushed home from work, we're all eating supper, and unlike me, you're not the ones who talk while muted. I promise you I'll do that at least once tonight. So, the goal tonight is to give participants the opportunity to put the COS in perspective. In 1937, the COS was founded, and ophthalmology at that time was still part of the ear, nose, and throat section of the Canadian Medical Association. Since then, the profession has grown to include multiple subspecialty societies, grown in innovation and technology, in scale, scope, and efficiency. The COS supports our members through advocacy efforts, by providing world-class educational opportunities, as we'll hear more about tonight, patient-focused websites, like the STP that we talked about earlier, and communicating with the public and decision makers. In collaboration with government and vision health stakeholders, some of whom are joining us this evening, welcome, the COS has begun to lay the foundation for a national vision health desk, the national policy voice for the vision health community. We've also developed a close working relationship with Health Canada to alleviate ophthalmic drug shortages and continue to inform you, the profession, of current and pending shortages and their anticipated duration. And we are beyond excited to again bring together ophthalmologists from across Canada at our 2023 annual meeting and exhibition happening in Quebec City, June 15th to 18th this year. This meeting boasts an outstanding international and Canadian faculty presenting the latest in ophthalmic research and practice, and you'll hear more about this later in our program. So, a reminder, as you listen to the presenters this evening, post any questions you have in the Q&A. We'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. And without further ado, let's get the forum started. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, COS President, Dr. Phil Hooper. Dr. Hooper's been instrumental in helping the COS develop a greater active role in advocacy, having served 2 terms as the inaugural chair of the Advocacy Council. Dr. Hooper's vision is to help the COS advocate on behalf of the profession to government, regulatory bodies, and the public, with the goal of improving access to the highest standard of eye care. I have to say, I've had the pleasure of a front row seat to all that Phil has contributed to the COS and Canadian ophthalmology on your behalf, as Phil and I have shared seats at the board table over the past 9 years, I believe, Phil. During Phil's 2 terms as chair of the Advocacy Council and now as his term as president. So thank you, Phil, for all your amazing work. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll turn the forum over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm humbled and honored both at the same time. I have the pleasure of being able to talk to everybody tonight a little bit about advocacy. If this can work there we go. I guess the first thing I'd like to mention is that I read my financial disclosure slide in depth a few minutes ago and realized I do have an affiliation. I belong to and am supported by the COS. So with that disclosure, we'll move on. The past couple of years, as you know, have been tumultuous, and that has created some real challenges in the communication and advocacy area because COVID and the fallout from COVID, the surgical closures and everything else have basically created a huge vacuum into which there's very little room for a lot of other things that are going on. But the COS has been busy. We've been continuing to work in the advocacy and communications area over this period. We've done a number of things that are going to be very helpful to us now and going forward. You're going to hear a little later on tonight from David Plemmel about the Drug Shortages Network. This is something that was started by Jamie Taylor with the COS a few years ago, but we have been working with Health Canada, and we now have a very collaborative relationship with them, which should serve us well as we move forward. In September of 2021, there was a workshop that we convened on non-hospital surgical centers. We followed this by surveys across Canada with stakeholders to understand this new and evolving area. Some areas of the country, as you know, it's less new and evolving than it is in others, but it is certainly moving forward very quickly with the announcements in Ontario. It's front and center, I think, for many people who practice here in our thought process. Out of this, we've created a principle document which can outline basically the things to keep in mind as these centers are initiated and operated in order to ensure patient safety, but also to make sure that the physicians working in this environment are able to work to their fullest and are not compromised. This document, we had the opportunity to share it with the bureaucrats in Ontario when they first were considering this approach, and hopefully working with EPSO, we'll have further dialogue. We've created a number of position statements over the last couple of years. I just want to talk briefly about the biosimilars position statement. This is moving forward very quickly. It was created, the most recent document, in concert with the Canadian Retina Society and the Canadian Uveitis Society, but it's going to be very important because the governments are moving forward in a way certainly in certain provinces that is going to restrict our ability to move back and forth between drugs. And so we need to use this researched, it is a well-researched document, position paper to hopefully leverage some discussions and deal with this issue. Had a number of press releases. Hopefully you've seen some of them. Most recently today, there was discussion in UBC about the program there, and Briar Sexton was able to comment on behalf of her province and as well as COS. We've mentioned the ICANN podcast. So where are we going from here? Our stories and our media engagement in the last 2 years have principally been around raising awareness of eye health, eye diseases, the fact that many of them are treated, not all of them produce symptoms in the earliest development. In the next period of time, we want to move into some of the areas in which ophthalmology takes a leadership role in the treatment of eye disease, surgery, innovation, and talk about some of these so people can get an understanding of some of the questions they may have about eye procedures and outcomes, as well as what's ahead. The other thing that we're working on now that I want you to be aware of is the National Vision Health Desk. And why is that important? It sounds like a kind of mom and pop kind of statement, a lot of bureaucracy and not a lot of action. But if you look at what the National Dental Desk has accomplished for dentistry and the provision of dental care in the country, it really has elevated the importance of dental hygiene and the access to care to a much higher level, both federally and provincially. It's coordinated the process of moving that forward. And that's exactly what the National Vision Health Desk can do for ophthalmology and eye care. It can provide an impetus to spur research in topics which are important to eye care delivery in Canada. It can help coordinate the access to new technologies and really move us forward. We've been working on this with our partners, the Canadian Optometric Association, Foundation Fighting Blindness, the CNIB, for some time, but we really got a step forward when Judy Scrow tabled a private members bill in November of 2021. This has got tripartite support across the House of Commons, and I believe will likely move forward this bill to create a national health strategy. We're piggybacking on this with Judy to hopefully move that forward to a vision health desk. The COS created a budgetary submission that is now sitting in the finance department, and we're actively lobbying both critical MPs as well as the Department of Health, the Department of Finance, and other ministries that are going to be key to getting this moving forward. The timeline for this is really going to be in the next several months, so it's still a very important issue and one that we'd like your engagement, your continued engagement and help. With this, we'll move to the first polling question in my presentation, if we could. Really, we'd like to see what you think are the important issues that we should be working on to get some feedback. So I'll give you a few moments to select. You can only select one, but if you could do that, and then when that period is over, I believe they're going to show the results. We need some jazzy music, I guess. That's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, human resources is one that we had thought internally is really key. And we're working with the CUPO on that. Go to the next slide. My slides have stuck. Here we go. So this is just, again, a summary of the resources that are out there. Some of them you know about, I hope, and others you may not. They're all available on the website, or they come to you, or available, as Colin said, the podcast through the podcast provider. You're going to hear more about the drug shortages database from David, so I won't talk about that. So as I end, I think the question is, why is this important? We're all busy. When it really matters, we generally speak up. But the difficulty is, if we're not at the table, we're not heard. And I think David's story that he's going to tell you about how we've been able to get to the table and really start to work effectively with Health Canada on drug shortages is a good example of why it takes time. It's like dripping water sometimes on a stone, but occasionally things move forward very quickly when you're at the table. And so that's our goal, is to be there, to be viewed as approachable, credible, and collaborative with the patients at the forefront. So how can you help? Volunteering has many rewards, and it is very helpful for our organization. We really need spokespeople across the country because invariably these requests come at odd hours and odd times, and we're doing a much better job of being able to reach these. So I guess the final thing I want to ask the audience is some questions about volunteering. So if we could go to poll number 2, please. Have you volunteered with us in the past? And then we'll get the result of this. Okay, so there's opportunity to engage more people. And hopefully some of these things tonight will help with the engagement. I think the issue is often around time, discomfort with standing in front of an audience. And I hope tonight I've helped to show it really does make a difference, and you'll see that as this goes forward. And please let us know how we can help. Kim is very approachable. She is the head of communications. Send me an email or send one to Kim and let's talk. Thank you very much for your attention. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for that great overview, and thanks for all you're doing in your leadership role. A reminder to everyone who's on, participants, put your questions you may have as the presentations roll by, as we hear about all these topics and initiatives that COS is up to. When you have questions, please post them in the Q&A. You'll see the tab down at the bottom, and post them in there, and we'll do our best to get to those. Phil, I just wanted to ask you if people, circling back to the National Vision Health Desk, if people wanted to try and support that, are there things our individual members can do that could help to advance that? Is contacting their MP. I think we have some resources we've provided to people, but perhaps having a chat with their MP. Are these things that would be useful, do you think?
Absolutely. I think that's probably the most important thing that people can do. And we've had people across Canada doing that. As you mentioned, the resources came out to membership. If you've deleted the link and need to get it again, Kim would be happy to circulate it for you. Going forward, we're going to be sort of tapping people on the shoulder who live in key ridings. For instance, the riding of Jagmeet Singh, the riding of Krista Freeland. You'd think I'd be able to know the name by now, but key opinion makers that we want to influence, that they know that this is out there and why it's important to support it. So yes.
That sounds great. And one other question, is there an opportunity to engage medical students? How can medical students be volunteers with the COS?
There is a medical student forum that is run by the COS. It's headed by Dr. Zia, and through that and through Dr. Zia, you can have a much better understanding of how you can get involved. You can also approach Kim directly, but there are many avenues for involvement. We've had medical students involved in many of our projects in the past, and they provided invaluable assistance. The one I can think about last was our biosimilar statement. An individual doing in training provided a huge amount of legwork in doing the research and the background to that document.
Yeah. That sounds great. Thanks again, Phil, for all you're doing, and we'll move on to our next presentation. Our next speaker, Dr. Lauren Bellin, an ophthalmologist who subspecializes in oculoplastic surgery. He's a past president of the COS. He's chair of the Department of Ophthalmology at the University of Manitoba and was responsible for reestablishing a residency program at the school after a 20-year absence. I've had the pleasure of working with Lauren on projects both at the COS and at the Royal College, and I can attest to his clear thinking and organized approach. I appreciate it greatly. I want to thank you, Lauren, for all you've contributed in a lot of diverse areas. I think most recently along some of your work on human resource planning, along with Yvonne Buys for ophthalmology in Canada, and that's been vital. Most recently, I have to say I went back and watched the YouTube videos you facilitated on ergonomics in the OR, as I've been having some neck and back problems in the OR. So thanks again for those as well. Dr. Bellin will share his knowledge and expertise with us around competency by design. So welcome, Lauren. We look forward to hearing about CBD, competency by design, coming soon.
Okay, so first of all, I have no financial disclosures related to this. I do want to thank the COS for allowing me to give this brief presentation because it's certainly very timely. As you probably know, CBD is going to be starting up soon. The first cohort is going to be starting this coming July. So I wanted to sort of provide a little bit of information about it. So the first thing I want to just talk about is, why did the Royal College push for this? And really the reason is because there's evidence out there that correlates resident training with their overall career performance in practice. So it's really critical to provide our trainees with the best training possible. This JAMA paper from 2009 in obstetrics really sort of highlighted this point. And in the paper, what they did was they had a number of quality performance indicators, and they looked at schools, and they were able to divide them into quartiles and look and compare performance. And then they followed people out into practice. And what they found was that, as people developed experience and stuff, their performance improved. And so there was some element of regression towards the mean for both the top schools and the bottom schools, but they never actually met. Someone who had trained at the top school ultimately always had better performance indicators. And so really, with that kind of information out there, it sort of behooves all of us to provide the best training possible. Another point that is part of the rationale for changing for CBD is that the role doctors have evolved through different stages of their career, from entry into the specialty all the way through to retirement. And there are different competencies that are required at these different stages. And so it makes sense to identify what these competencies are and then to train for them at the correct level and with appropriate evaluation. Probably one of the biggest shifts is a paradigm shift in thinking about evaluation and assessment. While residents currently have daily encounters with faculty and may be given some feedback, it rarely is documented under the current system, so that evaluations of residents' performances are done in the current system at the midpoint or at the end of the rotation. And ultimately, it ends up being based on purely, I'm going to say, vague recall of any points that might have stood out during the preceding time. I know I'm certainly guilty of that when I get asked to provide feedback on residents. In CBD, the focus shifts to assessment for learning on a daily basis. Faculty should be looking at every encounter with the residents as a potential learning opportunity for growth. And either right at the time of the encounter or towards the end of the day, faculty should be identifying what the resident did well and telling them to continue doing those things, giving them supportive feedback, and also telling them how they could improve, how they could do something better the next time. And then a key part of all this is documenting all this feedback into the resident's portfolio. There's a change of mindset. We really need to shift to be considering ourselves coaches. We should be thinking along the lines of sports coaches who are watching every aspect of their players' performance with a view to identifying incremental changes that can be adopted over time to achieve peak performance. Coaching is all focused on future performance and is developmental in nature. So there are several sort of cornerstones to the CBD concept, and one of them is this notion of coaching in the moment. And this is one of the three cornerstones. Timely, frequent, low stakes feedback in the workplace is just much more helpful than a report that you are doing well or progressing satisfactorily at the midpoint or end of a block. Documenting that feedback is critical to helping paint a composite picture of how the resident is doing. While coaching in the moment should occur on a daily basis, periodically there should also be times when a designated coach, possibly the program director and the resident, reflect on what's been accomplished over time and where greater emphasis should be placed in the future because of gaps, weaknesses, or opportunities to improve strengths. To help residents and faculty focus on some cornerstones that optimally should be mastered during that stage of the training, entrustable professional activities, or EPAs, have been created for each stage of training. These include a statement about the objective of the EPA, the setting in which it should take place, and the number of observations that ideally should be recorded. In the CBD system, residents should receive many types and a far greater volume of assessment data, mostly coming from coaching in the moment sessions. The summation of these data biopsies or snapshots of work over time will illuminate the bigger picture of how the resident is progressing towards competence. The more observations, the clearer the picture of competence. The Competency Committee is sort of the third cornerstone of the system, and it's the body that's responsible for regular review of resident progress using all of the multi-source data available. The Competence Committee is tasked with determining that the resident is progressing satisfactorily and also coming up with recommendations for a tailored educational plan. As part of the coaching over time, program directors and/or other clinicians fulfilling this role will give residents guidance and input on how to synthesize the assessment data from a variety of sources in order to adjust their behavior and performance and create plans and goals for the future. So we have a polling question at this point. Will your practice be affected by CBD? Yes or no? Give you a few seconds to respond to that. I have a sneaking suspicion I know how the vote will go. Okay, I was expecting it was going to be even more overwhelmingly on the yes side, so that's interesting. Okay. How do I move forward now? Okay, so competency by design has been operational now for several years in many programs in other disciplines. And I don't want to give you the false impression that it's working well everywhere. It's clear to the staff at the Royal College leading the transition that some programs are performing much better than others, and some schools are doing much better than others. From their observations, they put together 5 do's and don'ts to try and help programs to be more successful. So I'm going to share them with you. Some programs have run into trouble when they become fixated on the EPAs, feeling that the number of assessments are absolutely critical and that they are the only information that should count towards for the Competency Committee. Other programs have run into trouble by not adopting the coach in the moment method and just relying on the mid and end of block rotations as per the old system. In some programs, residents have felt that the Competence Committee has been exclusively focusing on residents in trouble and not paying any attention to the rest and helping them to excel. Finally, residents have reported a lot of stress in programs where the faculty take no initiative in identifying coaching in the moment encounters, and so it's left up to the resident to identify how any aspect of the encounter could be used to help complete an EPA assessment, leaving all the work up to the residents. So these are some of the features that have been found in programs that are doing very well with competency by design. The competency committee has not focused exclusively on the numbers in the EPAs and really has paid a lot of attention to the narratives. And I can't stress that enough. Writing down what you see rather than ticking off a 3 or a 4 is much more helpful when you put words to your comment about how the student's doing. And gathering information to create a holistic view of the resident's progression. Programs need to orient the residents repeatedly. This is all new for them as well, and they need help understanding how this new system works and how they're supposed to work in it. It works best when residents get regular progress reports. It really works best when the competency committee not only says that a resident is progressing satisfactorily, but also suggests a tailored learning plan for the resident. And finally, transition to CBD works best when departments engage the faculty, helping the faculty through the transition and provide feedback to individual faculty members as to how they are doing. So I hope that each and every one of you will find the transition easy and that you'll enjoy the shift to coaching in the moment. I personally have been trying to do that for some time and do find it very rewarding. And I hope that our future residents and our patients will benefit from this change. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for that great overview. Couple of questions. So it was interesting to see your poll there. So roughly a 50-50 split. And I suspect that may reflect a sort of across academic center, people based there versus ophthalmologists in the community. So I guess one question would be, how does CBD likely to affect in the future, perhaps, ophthalmologists who are not based in an academic center or not involved with trainees? And I reflect back on my background as chair of CPD Council, and do you think this is the logical sort of conclusion or continuation of this is to alter how we do continuing professional development as well?
Well, I think the Royal College certainly feels that way. The Royal College has sort of been trying to change its philosophy about training. It really was, traditionally just sort of focused on the residency spot and then really didn't do much for fellows after the fact. If in that slide where I showed you the different layers and I said the different transitions, I mean, there were even sections in there about transition towards retirement. And the Royal College is trying to think of ways of developing, competency teaching for that. So, that may not involve teaching residents, but there may be some component of having interactions with fellows to help them learn what they need to know in these career changes.
Question from the Q&A. Are there any experts from programs that have implemented CBD that we can reach out to for advice as we begin down this road? Jonathan Wong is asking.
Yeah, well, at most schools, what's happened is that the Postgraduate Medical Education Committee has tried to identify some leads in CBD, and they are the resources, the resource people that help the groups that are making that transition. As well, I think many of us have connections with other departments, like ENT has made this shift before we have, and many other groups have, so that if colleagues in the area, they'll be turning that to those individuals. I'm sure the program directors are going to be turning to their colleagues to get some input.
Right. And the information you shared, it sounds like the college is sort of collating experience as you go and then resharing that with new programs as they embark on this.
Right. And actually, that reminds me that for individuals, there is a wealth of information about CBD on the Royal College website, so that if you have any questions about any aspect, when you log on to the Royal College website, one of the main choices after you've indicated that you're a fellow is information about CBD down the page. And once you click on that, you can just do a search on any topic you want. And there's pages and pages of information.
Okay. Thanks so much. A reminder to participants, we'll be looking at the Q&A as we go along. Don't forget to put your questions in there. If you think about questions after you've reflected on a presentation, put them in there anyway, because we're going to return to sort of a panel at the end and hopefully have time for a couple of questions that we can direct. So if you think of things afterwards, so don't hesitate to post them in the Q&A. Let's move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker, Dr. David Plemmel, is a trilingual ophthalmologist who's trained in orbit and oculofacial plastic surgery. He has a breadth of experience serving different cultural groups across Canadian provinces and territories. I first met David during some of the advocacy work the COS has been doing, both in supporting our colleagues in Alberta and in development of some of the COS advocacy initiatives. I personally am really delighted that David has joined the board. We welcome his perspective and expertise there. Dr. Plemel has been instrumental in the COS's work around drug shortages and his continued engagement with Health Canada, continuing some of the work that Jamie Taylor started, as well as with our industry partners. Moving this issue to the forefront is really invaluable. I know it's a topic that is top of mind for many of us, and I suspect many of our over 200 registrants for this forum looked at drug shortages and are here partly because of that. There's been a couple of times the past year or so where I felt like I really had like 1 or 2 ophthalmology medications left that I could prescribe. So David, welcome. Thank you. Please tell us more about the issues of drug shortages.
Thanks so much, Colin. A real pleasure to be here this evening. As you said, I recently joined the board, and as you can see, I'm in the early stages of the career, and I've done some time locuming across different parts of the country, so it's been interesting to see how it's been affecting different parts of the country. So for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to speak about the role of the COS advocacy in drug shortages. I do not have any financial disclosures that may affect the content of this presentation. We begin at the COS website. Across the COS website, across the top, there are tabs. One of them is the Communications tab, and when you click on the Communications tab there, it brings up a drop-down menu. Within the drop-down menu, we can see the Drug Shortages tab. Clicking on it will open the Drug Shortages page. This is the COS Drug Shortages page. This website, it's a list of current and anticipated ophthalmic drug shortages. It only lists drugs that are applicable to ophthalmology, and it's generated each day from Health Canada. So it's a go-to page for information about ophthalmic drug shortages, and it always is up to date. Just to get a landscape, have people on the call been using, or have you used the drug shortages webpage on the COS website? So it's good to see that we started the COS webpage. It is a great resource. So for those who are experiencing shortages, wondering if they are experiencing a drug shortage that other providers are experiencing as well, it's great to go to that webpage and see what the status of those medications are. Sometimes they're locally not available, but if it's in a national shortage and Health Canada is aware about it, it will pop up on this website. The COS drug shortages page is populated directly from Health Canada. This is the Health Canada website. It lists all the Canadian drug shortages and all Canadian medications. Drug Shortage Canada is a repository for everything a person could want to know about drug shortages in Canada, but this website and the COS website, they only provide information. The websites don't advocate for improvements. They don't bring drugs back to market, and that's where the COS got involved back in 2008. In 2008, home atropine and atropine were both set to be lost from the Canadian market, and there was individual concern from across the country about the implication for patients. It was discussed at the COS as to whether it fit in the mandate of the organization to get involved. Word for word, the mission of the COS is to strive towards the provision of optimal medical and surgical care for all Canadians by promoting excellence in ophthalmology and providing services to support its members in practice. The COS is the advocate for vision health for all Canadians. So yes, in 2018, it was decided that the COS should become an advocate during drug shortages, and the COS went from being a passive source of information to becoming an active player. The COS opened talks with industry partners, medical distributors, patients, providers like yourselves, and Health Canada about what could be done to avoid a drug shortage in atropine. Along with other players, the COS helped to keep atropine on the Canadian market. And the COS has continued to do this and play an active role during drug shortages of atropine, verteporfin, timolol, potent steroids. The current shortage the COS is working on is the lack of potent ophthalmic steroids. To give you an idea of how it works, the COS had brought this issue the lack of potent ophthalmic steroids, to the attention of Health Canada back in September of 2022. Health Canada asked the COS to clarify the clinical impact that this would have on patients. Dr. Jamie Taylor and I represented the membership, and a tier assessment committee of Health Canada was convened. The TAC includes other national organizations, and we represented the COS membership asking for these drugs to be given Tier 3 status. Tier 3 status is the highest level of drug shortage, and what it does is it gives Health Canada new powers to bring a drug back to market. We, the COS, were supported unanimously by other national organizations, and through the advocacy of the COS and other national organizations, these 3 medications were given Tier 3 status. Incredibly, at the time, there were only 27 medications within this status across Canada, and these 3 drops were 3 of those 27. I think that this has impacted a lot of people, but I'd like to get an idea. Has your practice been impacted by the shortage of potent ophthalmic steroids? I give a few options there because some parts of the country, although we are getting those medications back on market, seem to be still having troubles. And yeah, exactly. So that's reflecting what we're hearing across the country. You'll be happy to hear there is a meeting with Health Canada happening next Tuesday that I'll be on as well, and we're getting an update as to where we're going with that. So thank you to everybody for that. This input is necessary for advocacy, and input comes from patients, companies, and yourselves, the providers and members of the Canadian Ophthalmological Society. When there's good information, advocacy can happen, and the COS works with other partners and aims for the outcome of bringing drug shortages back to market. So we are trying to advocate on your behalf, members and patients, to help bring drug shortages to an end. Over the last few years, you can see we've been trying to position ourselves as a valuable member of the drug shortage team, and I think this is paying off. Even last night, I got a message from Health Canada asking if we could put together an ad hoc meeting regarding the last polling question that I'll ask you, so you can give me an idea as we go into that meeting next week. The industry and Health Canada have been contacting COS when anticipating shortages will happen, and we've been reaching out to them with concerns from members when we're hearing about shortages from ourselves. Another aim we're trying to do right now is create an essential medications list, something that Health Canada itself has asked for, so that they can pinpoint which medications are essential and quickly escalate those to address drug shortages. To finish the poll, as I alluded to, there's an upcoming TAC meeting on intracameral miotics. The Myostat shortage has been estimated to end on April 14th, and Myocol has been estimated to end on April 3rd, but those timelines are always a bit iffy. So what effect might this be playing, or what effect might it play on your practice? And we'll close that one. Excellent. Yeah, so already affecting about a quarter of participants and anticipated to affect almost half of us altogether. And then some people not anticipating any problems, and some people don't use it. So great to know that over half of the country is already experiencing or anticipating a shortage within the end of that. Well, great. Well, that's going to bring me to the last slide of mine. Colin, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you for your work in this super important area. I know my practice has been impacted by many of these shortages and continues to do so. The resource, having a list that we can look at on the website and get some indication of how long these things are lasting, can be super important. Can you just a couple of the questions that have come up. One would be, what is the main cause for these shortages, do you think? I know there's probably a number of factors, but one of the participants is wondering what the main cause might be.
Yeah, there's been a couple different main causes, it seems, and a lot of it is manufacturing backlogs across international supply lines right now. So that has slowed down some of the supply lines for the manufacturers themselves. It's often difficult as well for the companies to keep up with requirements nationally. So keeping up with that has been a bit of a difficulty as they're trying to get the supply lines moving again, and then ensuring that they're keeping up with Canadian standards. So Canadian standards are quite high, and that was a big difficulty with Durezol, which has been difficult for a lot of patients, I think, something was noted in the manufacturing of it, and Health Canada delayed it all, and they're back in discussions trying to put it back on the market to get that back through.
There's a question in the Q&A about any word on topical pilocarpine.
On topical pilocarpine, I haven't specifically had a lot on the go with that, but that was from Dr. Bugla, so I appreciate that, and I will put it on my list of things to be looking into.
And finally, from Dr. Epstein, can patients advocate for the drug shortage? Is there a way that patients can influence this conversation or raise the importance or the value of this?
I think patients hold a huge power in this. And one thought comes to mind is that, say, for example, in British Columbia, patients can go across the border and buy some of these medications in the United States. Buying Durezol in the United States is anywhere from $200 to $400 US for a bottle, whereas back in Canada it was only about $50. And it's interesting to know that it's been difficult to get that drop within Canada, but just across the border in Washington State, a patient could go and pay for it if they were able to. And I think talking to MLAs is important. The more people who are talking about these issues and the disparities that you might have in health outcomes, just being able to drive across the border increases and elevates that discussion to a new level that is beyond just Health Canada or ourselves, and puts it onto a more political landscape where patients are really great advocates for themselves when their MLAs have the power to speak to it.
Two short snappers to finish off. Dr. Chan or Toby Chan says it seems that Betoptic is now on back order this week and it's not on the page yet. Is there a lag time for these things to show up on the page, and how often does it update?
So as soon as Health Canada knows about it, they do put it up, and drug companies are asked to give it onto the Health Canada website so that it can be reflected immediately. However, there is a little bit of leeway within the timing of that, because if they anticipate that the drug shortage is going to be short-lived within a few days, then they actually don't have to. But Health Canada does encourage it to happen right away. However, there is a little bit of leeway within the rules on Health Canada with that.
And the last one, the question actually asked by Dr. Cormier was, will we ever have access to Veroptic topically again? But maybe I'll just adjust the question a little bit. What your work has been that you've described to us so far and is a huge improvement over before, where we never knew much about what was going on. We're having a lot more information flow with industry and with Health Canada. But do you want to make any comment about an essential medication list? Is there something underway about that in development? And could we be more proactive in identifying things that are important to us that may have disappeared or at risk for disappearing?
That's a great redirection of the question, and I appreciate it, because truly, Health Canada really wants to know what medications are essential to our practices, and to be able to elevate that to them more quickly. That gives them a little bit more power and leeway to talk with manufacturers. So for things like Veroptic, or even speaking to another provider today, they said, will fluorescein strips be more easily available down the line? These are the types of things that Health Canada is interested to know about, and that's what we're working at within an essential medication list, so that we can bring that again to the forefront, some of these medications that have kind of fallen dormant, if you will, and hasn't been put under the spotlight again.
Thanks again, David, and thanks for all your work and for informing us a bit more about this incredible work that's going on behind the scenes. It's vital to what we do every day. We'll move on to the next speaker. Our next speaker, probably known to most, Dr. Mona Dagher. She's a professor of ophthalmology at the Université de Montréal and head of the Department of Ophthalmology. Dr. Dagher brings expertise on keratoprosthesis surgery to Canada after conducting research and clinical work at Harvard Medical School in her training and background and through her work with that and restoring sight to several Canadian patients, Boston K-Pro was recognized as Personality of the Week through La Presse and Radio-Canada. As chair of the COS annual meeting, Mona, in conjunction with our dedicated COS staff, you've skillfully guided us through the tumult of the last few years with a switch to the annual online annual meeting for 2 years, back again in person with our meeting in Halifax, thank goodness, in June of 2022, each time presenting a scientific program of the highest caliber. I'm hoping tonight you'll share more on this premier scientific event for eye physicians and surgeons. Dr. Dagher, welcome. Thank you for all you do, and tell us about what's to come.
Thank you so much, Colin, for this great introduction. It's really humbling. I can't do this without COS and the whole COS team and the leadership and the presidency. You've guided me through it, Colin, as well as Phil. So I do not have any financial disclosures, and it's been an honor and a privilege to chair the COS annual meeting since 2018. And as you said, in 2020, during the pandemic, we had to shift gears and go virtual for 2 consecutive years. It was so well attended, and it actually changed our mindset, but we were so excited to go back in person to Halifax, and it was a great meeting with a huge attendance. And again, we're looking forward to receiving everyone in Quebec City this June, again in person. It's a very exciting program coming along beautifully so far. The COS annual meeting, as you know, brings together the Canadian community of eye care professionals, ophthalmologists, from different subspecialties, comprehensive ophthalmologists. We discuss recent research, state-of-the-art equipment, new technologies, diagnostic and surgical, clinical eye care. And what's most fun about it is that we get to network with colleagues from across Canada. Not only do ophthalmologists meet, but residents, medical students, fellows from all the different training programs in Canada, ophthalmic assistants, nurses, ophthalmic technicians, and orthoptists also have dedicated sessions. So the whole team works really hard, relentlessly throughout the year to bring forth this huge meeting once a year that is very well attended. Of course, this COS annual meeting is an accredited through the maintenance of certification of the Royal College. So here's a poll question for you. Approximately how many Section 1 credits and Section 3 credits are provided by the annual meeting? I'll give you time to respond. But in the meantime, I'd like to also let you know that it is accredited for Section 2 credits through the posters. And the more posters you view, the more posters you learn from, the more Section 2 credits you can gain as well. Okay, so it actually gives you, up to 30 credits, and actually sometimes even more, depending on how many sessions we host. Okay, I'm going to move forward here. So who are we? The annual meeting planning committee is a great group of volunteers. We work really hard every year to put together this wonderful meeting, and we try to deliver exceptional high quality scientific program. Of course, there's a chair of the annual meeting, the chair of the Council on CPD, the chair of the maintenance of certification. There's representatives from each of the affiliated societies and subspecialty groups. There's an adjudication committee that allows for the awards of the papers and posters. And of course, there's a manager of CPD from the COS staff, and the whole COS staff chips in to deliver this wonderful meeting. As you can see, all subspecialties of ophthalmology are represented. Comprehensive ophthalmology is also included. Women in ophthalmology have their yearly session. The SCCs take place, and these are excellent surgical teachings. The residents also have a role to play, and we host co-developed symposia with the industry. And new to COS since last year is the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion session. So how do we do it? Session chairs of subspecialty groups, along with the chair, develop learning objectives based on needs assessment from surveys that are conducted yearly. Session chairs then go ahead and invite these keynote speakers and also the faculty, Canadian faculty, and they help them develop presentations that are balanced and evidence-based. Planning for the annual meeting begins a whole year in advance. We develop themes and taglines. We call for abstracts in October. And then from October to the winter, we start doing the review process. Then we select the posters, the papers that will be presented in the program. And the subspecialty session chairs will then develop their sessions. There will be also the surgical transfer courses that are developed, the self-assessment programs as well. There's a huge amount of work that is involved. And I can tell you that already in January today, we have a huge program coming along beautifully. And also the keynote speakers. Every year we host around 20 keynote speakers who are leaders in ophthalmology and very well renowned. They give multiple talks throughout the meeting and also during current concepts. So they're really a treat to have. Surgical transfer courses are really a highlight, and they've been known for the annual meeting now for many years. They are Section 3 accredited programs. These courses are planned and facilitated independently by ophthalmologists. We have a high faculty to participants ratio, and industry does provide in-kind donations, but the number of industry representatives in the course is actually limited, and industry members do not participate in the training. They're there sometimes to help us with the equipment, but the training is done by ophthalmologists. Self-assessment programs, these are newer. These are planned also and facilitated by the ophthalmologists and by the session chairs who decide each year to have them. It came about through the pandemic when we went virtual. We developed them. They allowed us to give Section 3 credits to the participants, but they were so well attended and so highly valued that we are continuing to deliver them now through the in-person meetings. I'd like at this point to invite you to the COS annual meeting that will take place in June in Quebec City, a historic and charming city. We had to move out of Montreal because at the last minute, Grand Prix changed their days and they fell on our weekend of meeting in Montreal. So at this point, the meeting will be taking place in Quebec City. We're very excited about it. The meeting is already shaping up to be a beautiful rendition of the hard work of all the ophthalmology volunteers. So I'm going to ask you now, will you be attending the Quebec City annual meeting and exhibition? Yes, maybe, or no? And I hope it's 100% yes. Oof. Okay. We'll work harder. We're going to promote it very well, you'll see. So thank you for your attention, and we'd host some questions now.
Thank you so much, Mona. I think I can feel the energy building already for that meeting. So I look at that poll and 87% are yes or maybe. So we'll convert all the maybes. I don't know whether you know off the top of your head, where are we heading in 24 and 25?
So Toronto in 24.
Yeah.
And in 25, it's a good question. There's been so much change since the pandemic because we had to leave a few cities behind. So I'm not going to state anything for the moment. Yep.
No problem. Toronto the year after. 25 is Vancouver, I think. Christine has just posted in the chat there, so that's great. We return there, having planned to go there, and got knocked out by the pandemic. So that'll be fantastic. So it's great that we can move back and forth across the country. Great to see colleagues from all over the country, and it was wonderful to see everyone in Halifax. Looks forward to seeing even more in Quebec City. So thank you again, Mona, for all you do, all the planning and all the work that goes into it, and all the session chairs that contribute to it. We really appreciate it. At this point, I would invite Scott to open up, bring back all the panelists for a minute. We have just a couple of questions. that we'll return to. I know we're a couple of minutes over time here, so we'll just get to the 2 or 3 leftover ones here, questions that have popped up, and then we'll close. So one question, I think probably this might be Phil for you. What about, again, about patients? After Mr. Ford's recent announcement, someone has had a couple of patients ask if there's anything they can do to help out in terms of advocacy for eye care and for their eye health.
The long and the short answer is yes and yes. David outlined how patients can help with respect to drug shortages, with respect to telling their story, patient story, with respect to eye care delivery. Those are the kinds of stories we're trying to bring forward with our advocacy work this year. And what you need to do if there is a patient who wants to participate is connect them with Kim, and she'll work with them to see if there is an aspect that can be helpful.
Great, thank you. I think, Lauren, this is probably for you. How will CBD, sorry, competency by design, influence the duration of training? Will it change anything with duration of training?
When it first came out, it was being touted as something that was sort of time independent, with the concept that possibly some people would get through even faster. And then obviously some people might need a little bit more time. As it's evolved, there's really been this recognition that there still is the need for service provision on the wards. And so there just isn't the opportunity for people to finish early and leaves wards unstaffed just because they've attained competencies early. So really, in exceptional cases, someone might be able to finish early. There's also tremendous pressure to not have people train late. Certainly the deans, when CBD was announced, sort of said, well, we're not going to have the funding to allow people to do extra years. So I think there's going to be major push to just stay within the same time frame.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Mona, last question from the Q&A. It's a hot topic. I know we've talked about this at the board table a number of times. It would be helpful if the COS could offer a virtual option for the annual meeting for those unable to travel to attend in person. The AAO does this. Is this possible? I know we've discussed it. We've talked about it after our experiences with virtual meeting. I think we've talked about potentially opportunities perhaps for a little bit of a blended model in a limited sense. Where are we at with that?
Hybrid and having both at the same time. We are a nonprofit society. The COS annual meeting does bring in profits, but not enough to host something of this envergadure. So honestly, we always film some sessions, and these are available on demand. But to host both, it would be very costly. AAO is a huge organization with a lot more funds than us. And as a nonprofit society, it's important that we manage our finances properly. So I think the main limitation is actually finances, but also it's such a wonderful occasion to come together all in one place in person to meet and to share knowledge, share experiences, be together. I think it's important to have that. And we really did miss that during the 2 years where it was virtual. There was no camaraderie, there was no collegiality. It was really in front of your screen, just learning. So I think that's essential as well.
Thanks, Mona. I think the other point that we've discussed as well is that, prior to the pandemic, we didn't have much of this going on. And so we've committed to having more sort of online events people don't have to travel for over the year and can sort of extend. It used to be the annual meeting was our only touch point for CPD, and now it's expanded with what we've learned in the virtual world. So I think we'll be continuing with that as well. One quick last short snapper for David. A question, topical ganciclovir available in the US for years, probably a better option than Veroptic. Why is it not available in Canada? And so again, I'll massage that into a question of are we going to think about things like that we can do proactively in our relationship to leverage the relationship with Health Canada in the future as we move forward?
Yeah, it's a great question as to why some medications are available in other countries and not our country. even when some are more efficacious or might have evidence for them. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. It's expensive to bring medications into a region. It's expensive to host a medication. And we're not a huge country in the grand scheme of things. So a lot of the companies really have to be looking and turning a profit. But that said, as Colin alluded to, I think it's important to recognize that what we want to really shoot for is to make sure that we have an essential set of medications that are available within Canada, affordable for Canadians, both for those who can afford it out of their own pocket and for those who can't afford it out of their own pocket. So I think it'll be essential as we work together through a National Vision Health Desk and then through, without it at this current time, working one-on-one through Health Canada and through our industry partners, trying to figure out what medications we can have available for patients.
Wonderful. Thank you. Scott, you could bring up our final slide of the evening, if you would. And I'd just like to say in closing, we've kept you a couple of minutes over time, but it's been such a wonderful group of presentations. Thank you all for attending tonight. We had over 200 registrants for tonight. I hope you've learned more about what the COS does, the impact that we can all create together. I'd again like to thank all our panelists for their work and their contributions and their presentations tonight. Also like to take a moment to acknowledge our dedicated COS staff, in particular Monika and Kim, for all their hard work in making tonight's program possible. Thank you. Thank you for all you do. A reminder that to participants that you'll be receiving an email in the coming days with a link to the program evaluation. After completion of that, you'll receive your certificate of attendance and you can log this CPD activity for 1 hour of Section 1 accredited group learning. For those guests who joined us tonight, it was wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for attending. For those of you who are members of the COS, we're in our membership drive at the moment, and you'll be seeing your renewals coming out to your inbox. Please don't let them go to your spam folder. For those of you ophthalmologists in Canada who may have been on tonight and aren't members of the COS at the moment, I hope you have seen a little more about the value of COS and why speaking with one voice, we're stronger as one voice. So I hope you've seen some of that tonight. If you have any further questions, comments, or would like any additional information, please email or reach out to a staff member. I think the email address is on your screen there, and the COS website has the emails for each of the areas of COS staff, and we'd be happy to respond to that. So once again, thank you to everyone involved. Thank you to the participants and the panelists, and I wish you all a wonderful evening, and thank you again for joining us.